Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another very excited Civilizations in Review. This is our second to last series as we dive into the 93 different ancient empires, dynasties, kingdoms that make up the modern Southwest Asia, North Africa, Swana region. I'm so thrilled to have this conversation today. With me is Ana Campuzano, our incredible content writer and co-moderator extraordinaire, and this wonderful article about the Dabuyid Dynasty written by Amine Najm Andin, one of our most recent content writers. So thank you both for being here. Just as a reminder, I know it's been a while since the last one of these, so welcome back all. We are currently live streaming this to Facebook, but we will also cross-post this to our website, our Spotify, our YouTube, and our Instagram, so you can engage with this content, learn more about the Dabuyid Dynasty, and engage with our Alfuzaic energies. This will not be the full history of this great empire. That all will be on the actual website itself, alfuzaic.net, Civilizations 101, and then scroll down to Dabuyid. Amina's article has all of the hyperlinks and other pieces engaged, so you can really deepen your knowledge. And with that said, I will throw it to Ana to read the 101 word intro, and we'll start learning about this empire. Thank you all.
Thanks, Ben. So we have here the Dabuyid Dynasty written by Amine. The Dabuyid Dynasty, otherwise known as the Galbari Dynasty, was an Iranian Zoroastrian dynasty ruled by a group of independent kings called Isfahads. Most of what is known about the Dabuyid Dynasty is from a later historian, Ibn Isfandaryar, Tabaristan, written in the 13th century. Although the dynasty was founded by Gil Gafara in 1642 it was named after his son Dabuya, who controlled the kingdom after his father's death. Dabuyid's rule extended over Tabaristan and western Khorasan until the Abbasid conquest in 760. The dynasty ended with the suicide of Khurshid after a surprise invasion by the Abbasid Caliphate. After reading this and realizing how amazing it is to think about even writing about this, tell me what influenced you to want to write about the Dabuyid Dynasty?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I was really interested in when I pursued writing about the Dabuyid Dynasty was looking into its role as one of the last Zoroastrian dynasties in Iran. So a lot of my studies in the past have been focused on post-Islamic Southwest Asia and North Africa, but rarely touched upon the Zoroastrian history of the region. So as soon as I looked into the Dabuyid Dynasty and its Zoroastrian tradition, I was immediately pulled in and wanted to take a deeper look.
Yeah, the Zoroastrian dynasties are so fascinating, because they still exist today. So this is where they draw their roots from. But yeah, they aren't Islamic, they aren't Jewish, they aren't Christian, they aren't any of the major religious identities that most people associate with the region. And yet this is the oldest monotheistic religious tradition. So really fascinating that Dabuyid still through its empire was or dynasty was following this faith. Tell us more about your knowledge of this religion, of its engagement in the Dabuyid society, just what you saw through your research of this empire.
Absolutely. So yeah, as you said, it's one of the monotheistic religions that still does exist today. So it exists in neighboring India, and the Dabuyid dynasty played a role in defending the religion and keeping the tradition alive. One of the reasons that we continue to see Zoroastrian tradition today in India, in small communities over South Asia and the Middle East. And so it was really interesting to take a deeper look into, especially because, Ana, as you just read, almost everything we know about the Dabuyid dynasty is from one writer, one historian. So yeah, Ibn Isfandiar is the source for a lot of my research and writing when it comes to the Dabuyid dynasty. And his Tabaristan, which basically is a coverage of the entire Tabaristan region, starting from the Dabuyid dynasty over the next, I think, 1,000 years or so, really encapsulates everything we know about the dynasty, from its early history, its inception, its decline, as well as its allies, rivals. Everything I researched essentially comes from his tradition. And then another source that I think has been very useful for a lot of our researchers who've taken a look at other dynasties is the role of numismatics, or the study of coins. And so the way that we know about the various rulers of the Dabuyid dynasty are through their coinage. So the coinage, the dirhams, I believe, usually have the face of the king, the face of the ruler, or in this case, the isbabad, and their date of ruling. So that's a really great source for the information we have on the Dabuyid isbabads.
That's actually amazing. I'm so happy you mentioned that, because now it's popping back into my memory that I was at the British Library and they had an exhibition of Zoroastrianism. And I think some of these coinages, some of the artifacts that they were kind of showing, I mean, there wasn't much there. There were like these, beautiful books and sort of like the writing and a lot of things. So I think that Dabuya did an amazing, kind of like spreading this influence and keeping the religion survival, because we are able to still see it today, even in exhibitions and shows and things. So this is like quite I don't know, like a modern way of like modern influence. I think it's like that part of the article that I was thinking about. And if more of like what was there, like if there was anything artistic or anything that we can see today that sort of like it still remained of that part of that modern industry, not only from the Dabuyid dynasty, but also what they kept from the Zoroastrianism and the religion survival.
Yeah, so there is actually very limited modern influence from the Dabuyid dynasty. So the main things are, as you mentioned, the defense of Zoroastrianism. One of the reasons that it still is prospering today in parts of India, as I mentioned earlier. Not a lot of art, but what was quite interesting is one of the most famous leaders of the Dabuyid dynasty, Farhan the Great. He was excellent as a military leader, but also he really supported the development of cities. And one of those cities is actually modern-day Sari in Iran. So he developed the Saruya region, and Sari exists today as a bustling city and actually is the capital of Iran's Mazandaran province. And that is very much a direct modern influence from the Dabuyid dynasty, specifically Farhan the Great.
Fascinating. Very, very, very interesting. Yeah, this part of Iran touches the Caspian Sea. And so I'm assuming quite a lot of trade via the sea and goods and whatnot. And, please chat more as you learned. But I want to go back a little bit to your study of coins before we move forward. The main image for this article is one of their coins that have been discovered. And I would say probably 10 or so of all of the Civilizations in Review articles is via their coinage. This was like such an indelible mark of, how these, communities valued currency or traded or engaged with one another. But a really, really cool part of numismatics is how far the coins ended up through the trade routes, through the global sphere. And so I'm curious, kind of a two-part question, if how far Dabuyid's, not sorry, specifically coins, but influence reached in their ancient trade routes, and specifically, since they are on the Caspian Sea, the engagements and whatnot on the waterway.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually one thing that as I was reading Tariq-i Dabaristan, I wish that Ibn Asfandiar had kind of written a bit more about this, had provided a little bit more research, because actually we don't know much about the trade routes that the Dabuyids took. So a lot can actually be assumed by looking at their predecessors and their allies. So the Dabuyids were actually part of the cadet branch of the Sassanids. So they were the Sasanian cadet branch. I think that it was Jamasp, who was a cadet of the Sassanians, who first found Gilan, and his cousin Gil Gavbara annexed Tabaristan and brought that under the Dabuyid influence. And Gil Gavbara is the one who founded the dynasty itself. And so the Sasanians had a pretty strong trade tradition going on. And so it can be assumed that the Dabuyids themselves roughly followed the same traditions as the Sasanian dynasty.
Very, very interesting and fascinating. I'm interested now that you were talking about the inception and how they came about. How, because they were a dynasty for a century or more, and how was their expansion? I mean, how were their sort of like not only the routes that they followed, but which was the way, and like sort of like allies and like that sort of thing.
Yeah, so what's really special about the Dabuyid dynasty is that unlike a lot, you guys know that most of the dynasties in this region did not come about peacefully, whereas the Dabuyid dynasty really did. So as I said earlier, they were descendants of Sasanian cadets being the younger sons of kings, those who are not actively ruling. And the cadet branch signed a peace treaty with the Arabs, saying that the Arab forces were essentially barred from approaching any Dabuyid territory. And that was largely Tabaristan and I believe Gilan.
Mhm.
And basically the Dabuyids really prided themselves on their mastery of this really difficult terrain. It was mountainous, it was rough, and they were able to protect their space, protect their territory from the Abbasids and the Umayyads for a very long time. And you spoke about allies and rivals, and for the bulk of the time that the Dabuyid dynasty was active, their main rival was the Umayyad dynasty. And actually, the Umayyads did attempt on numerous occasions to take over the Dabuyid dynasty and Dabuyid territory, despite the peace treaty, which really only kept them safe while the Sasanian Empire was still alive and well.
Did they still use this sort of peaceful, when the Umayyads tried to like sort of invade some of the territories of the Dubayids, did they keep this kind of peaceful way of not like sort of fighting back, or how was it? How kind of was their relations? So I'm interested in understanding.
You would assume that given the peace treaty that they had better relations with the
Yeah.
Arab caliphates, but no, the Umayyads came in and forcefully tried to take over a few villages. I think they successfully took over 2 Dabuyid villages before Farhan the Great, who really earned his name. Farhan the Great came in and saved the Dabuyids and Dabuyid territory. There's a reason he's the most famous out of all of them. He was really not only active in city and region development, but also he protected the small Dabuyid dynasty from the Umayyads, who were far more powerful and their military capabilities were far greater. But again, part of that is they really mastered this difficult terrain. And that led to a lot of military success throughout the dynasty's time.
Let's talk a lot more about Farrakhan the Great, because
Yeah.
I like him.
yeah, give us all the scoop on his rulership. Obviously, he was a very great defender and
Yeah.
protector of the Dabuyids, but please give us more details that you have on him.
Yeah, so very much an excellent defender. And actually, he was the first out of all of the Dabuyid leaders. So he was the third, starting from Gil Gavbara, his son Dabuya, and then it was Farrakhan the Great. And Farrakhan was the first one to have coins with his imagery. So the earlier 2 didn't. Farrakhan the Great was the first, and I think partially that is a testament to his greatness. He was a very great defender, as you mentioned, a very great military leader. And he actually quelled a lot of internal riots and rebellion. So there was some rebellion that was coming from, yeah, there's the coin. That's him. That's Farrakhan. He actually defended the he quelled rebellions within the dynasty. I believe it was let me take a look here. I forget which group exactly within the region. Here we go. So he quelled internal rebellion from the Iranian Dalamite subjects. So the Dalamites, some consider them to be separate from the Dabuyid dynasty, but the Dabuyids considered them to be their subjects. And so oftentimes there were rebellions within Tabaristan, within the highlands, and Farhan the Great was the most successful in quelling them and creating this sense of unity throughout the Dabuyid territories.
It looks like he used mostly like the power of like diplomacy, but also his knowledge about, like you said, the terrain. Like, you know, a great leader usually has these sort of qualities of not only being able to have people under your rule that, you know, support you and understand, but also how to protect, you know, kind of like your borders and how to know when to use power, when to kind of, you know, use a little bit of confrontation rather than stepping back. This is honestly a fascinating story. And yeah, he's a great rule.
It's really fascinating to hear the I don't know, the different so many of these empires are like conquest, trade, slavery, etc., which probably was a part of Dabuyid as well, but hearing the diplomacy element is more rare for, you know, a civilization centuries ago. I'm curious if you have any more, you know, tidbits about that specific element of this empire, since that is relatively unique for most of these other ancient empires we have in our system.
Yeah, so not much from Ibn Isfandiyar on outside of what I've told you already about Farrakhan the Great and diplomacy. But in terms of the different leaders who led the Dabuyid dynasty, he was definitely, you know, dealt a good hand. Whereas if I can talk a little bit about the decline of the empire, so one of the last leaders of the Dabuyid dynasty was Khursid. And he continued the peace treaty with the Abbasid Empire and the Abbasid Caliphates. However, he was actually tricked, hence the decline of the Dabuyid dynasty. So what happened was the Caliph, the Abbasid Caliph Al-Mansur, asked Khursid if he could pass through the Dabuyid region, Dabuyid territory, through Tabaristan to quell one of his own internal rebellions. And he also offered to help Khursid quell a rebellion within the Dabuyid dynasty. And Khursid took this at face value, said, come on in, go ahead. And Al-Mansur was not hoping to quell any such sort of rebellion. He actually led a surprise invasion, and Khursid took it very poorly. He, you know, must have been heartbroken by this invasion and the surprise. So eventually Khursid committed suicide, and the dynasty itself fell to the hands of the Abbasid Caliphate.
I can't imagine Farrakhan doing such a thing.
Never. He would never.
He wouldn't have been so trustworthy.
He would have known.
Yeah, he would. I think he would have known. And I think that, you know, considering that there were other empires, dynasties that were trying to slowly but surely take over territory, I mean, conquering 2 villages and that sort of thing, you know, it's not that he should have known, but you did have something great in your hands, and it was a big empire, because it looks like they spread really far. So I definitely feel like there were some kind of like moments in which I could understand why he took it so poorly, because it kind of, you know, you were tricked and you fell for it. And geographically speaking, I mean, what were you really quelling there for the opposite? But in any case, it is really a fascinating story, and I love it if you can just add whatever else you can think about that was also interesting or a key part of the Dabuyid dynasty.
Yeah, absolutely. So when that actually happened, the Abbasid Caliphate was actively annexing territory. So I think there might have been, some reason to believe that they were not coming in peacefully. But it is also interesting to note the modern influence and value of the Abbasids coming in and taking over the Tabaristan, because they did bring Islam to that region, which is actively practiced now today. So that's modern day Iran. And I think that the Abbasid dynasty is the Abbasid Empire is far more known than the Dabuyid. It really was a vast empire. But one thing that I'd like to discuss regarding the Dabuya dynasty that I found really interesting is, here it is. So the Dabuyids faced skirmishes with the Turks on their eastern border, and then on their western border they had the Iranian Delamite subjects. What's surprising to me is that the Turks never had any success in annexation, in crossing over the border, and the Dabuyids were really successful in guarding this land. And again, I know I've mentioned it before, but I think that this is such a strength when it comes to the Dabuyid dynasty. These highlands, so I wish I could pull up a map and we could look at the territory. The terrain is really difficult. It's incredibly difficult to penetrate, and that's why the Turks were never successful. And the military tradition that existed in the Dabuyid dynasty was completely focused on the mastery of this terrain, on being able to keep any rivals out of their region. And I think it's so surprising. I mean, the Dabuya dynasty lasted a very long time. It lasted from 642 to 760, which I think is a very long time for such a small dynasty. And personally, given my research and everything I've looked at, they were surrounded by incredibly powerful dynasties and caliphates and empires, but they lasted so long. And this is really a testament to, again, I'll say it again, the mastery of that difficult terrain. There's no way that they would have succeeded for that long. They would have prospered for that long if they weren't able to focus on their military power and again working with the difficult land that their territory covered.
Wow. I mean, that's a really powerful statement right there, of the knowing your terrain and how Dabuyid was able to sort of hold on in a pretty key spot. I mean, anytime you're on a waterway in all of these historical empires we've looked at in dynasties, water is like the number one resource. And so the fact that they were directly on the coast of the Caspian Sea and were able to hold on to it through the diplomacy aspects of some great leaders, until the final trickery is very interesting. Yeah, what a sentence. I'm curious. I haven't really heard the term Isbahbad before. Their term for king, ruler, etc. Can you explain a little bit more, sort of what that term is? It just a cultural translation of king? Is it a different sort of role? I'm just curious if you know more about that term itself and what that looked like.
Yeah, it's a little bit different from the traditional, direct translation of king. So the Sasanians, who were the predecessors of the Dabuyids, had the king of kings, whereas the Dabuyids had these local rulers called Isbabads. So the Baristan would have its own Isbabad, and they would all fall under the overlordship of, for example, Farhan the Great, the overlordship of Galbari. But I think that's also another testament to their ability to work as diplomats, their diplomacy. These Isbabads work together to maintain the safety of the Dabuya dynasty, to maintain politics with other allies. So this is one of the early examples of multiple local rulers, ispabads, working together to rule an entire dynasty. That is not usually the case. Usually we've seen that there's one absolute ruler, there's one caliph, there is one king or Sasanian king of kings. And it is interesting to note that because the Dabuyids were a cadet branch of the Sasanians, the Sasanian king of kings was considered the overlord of all of the Dabuyid leaders. So while in name, the Sasanian king of kings was in charge of the Dabuyids, had, complete overlordship of the Dabuyids leaders really were autonomous. It was only in name, but these ispabads worked together for autonomy over their land. The Sasanian king of kings and the Sasanian leaders did not have much say in Dabuyid politics and the dynasty itself.
So were the Sasanian king of kings, they were sort of like the figurehead, but it wasn't really, they were still kind of like a separate dynasty. Is that where you're? Okay, this is actually a very modern way to rule. I mean, it almost sounds like a democratic way to rule. Like, you have your territory, you have the ispabads, and we all work together to kind of reach the same goals. But there is someone that you report to, which in like that case would be the main ruler. I don't know, Farhan, I guess, in its case. Okay. That's actually like a very, it almost makes me want to like draw a map of like what it looks like. It is a very like modern, I think modern for their time way of ruling, and very organized. You can tell that there was, diplomacy and within the region as well, and a lot of, respect for when it comes to that. And it was a really pretty big area, as we mentioned. So I definitely do think that that was the most effective way they could have gone. Just so that they could kind of control all the areas. This is amazing and fascinating. And I didn't expect, we usually think like Ben earlier said, it's like trade and that's the only thing that we kind of cared about. And I'm wondering, like, is there any information on how they ruled, like domestically, how were like the people, like, did they agree or what kind of like ruling system existed, like when it came to the ispabads and like inside that sort of thing? Or is there any information on that?
Very limited information.
Yeah.
However, I don't think it was a totally democratic system. I don't think that they were getting input from the lay people. But definitely very impressive that they did have multiple leaders working together for one dynasty. I think that's very uncommon. And I think it should be noted that the one who led Tabaristan was always the main leader. So Tabaristan was really the key piece of land, the key region within the Dabuyid dynasty. And they had a few other, important areas. They had Western Khorasan, they had Gilan, but Tabaristan was really the key piece of land for this dynasty. And whoever had control of Tabaristan was in turn the leader, the key leader that is now recognized. For example, Farhan the Great, Tabaristan, Galbari, Dabuya, all leaders of Tabaristan, and they were all descendants of that Sasanian cadet house.
So fascinating. Thank you for that sort of incredible overview of this empire over the last bit of this conversation. As we start to wrap up, any other final pieces of wisdom, of cool fun facts you learned? I'm curious about the modern city of Sari and its connection, if you want to talk more about that, but anything else you'd like to share, please do so.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that throughout my research, I found that the most, well, naturally, as we've discussed before, the most interesting character to take a look at throughout the Dabuyid dynasty was Farhan the Great. And the fact that he did focus on city development is incredible, is so, unlike his fellow leaders. And he really, put a lot of work into the development of the Saruya region. And it is incredible that that is today still a bustling city. I believe it's a really strong trade city. And again, it's the capital of that region of Iran, of the Mazandaran province. So that's really a testament to his strength as a leader. Even though he was a great military leader, obviously he had, really great qualities as a king outside of just military leadership. So that's excellent. And one of my key takeaways from researching the Dabuyid dynasty is we would have pretty much no information on this dynasty if the one writer, Ibn Isfandiyar, hadn't written his Tariq-i Tabaristan. So that is such a testament to the importance of historical writing and keeping research alive. And I kept thinking about that as I was writing. Everything we have on this great dynasty, on this incredibly fascinating dynasty, is from this one man who grew up in Tabaristan and decided to write a book on the history of the region that he grew up in. And so I think that's a really, really incredible source for learning about the region as well as the different dynasties. He also covers the Abbasid rule over Tabaristan, and I think it's a great read if anyone's interested. The English translation is available on JSTOR. I recommend it. It was an interesting read. And I really enjoyed learning and researching learning about the Dabuyid dynasty and researching all the great leaders and their systems.
Thank you, Amine, for this wonderful article. Really, I learned a lot, and I'm very happy.
Yeah, I'm so glad it's on the website now. So we will wrap up here. Thank you, Anna, as always, for your co-moderating prowess. It makes it so easy when we have someone with your wisdom and insight and questions here. So thank you. And Amine, this incredible article, so well researched, and to chat about this relatively small slice of history, and yet the richness that came from this one source. But also the coinage of Farooq Khan and everything else. It's been a really fascinating conversation. And to us, our audience and listeners, thank you for engaging with us. There are more parts of the fabulous Dabuyid dynasty that we did not get to on this call. So please make sure to go to the web page itself, alfuzaic.net, Civilizations 101, and then scroll down to Dabuyid to learn more. We will wrap up here. Thank you all for engaging. Thank you, Amine, for this fabulous article, Anna, for your work. And you, our audience, for listening and tuning in. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.